Okay, so once again, last week we did the first 4 folds of the Eightfold Path. And of course, this is, again, the primary method that the Buddha taught for how to overcome our ignorance so that we can find the true, lasting happiness of enlightenment. Of course, we can get little bits of happiness in our day-to-day lives. My favorite example, of course, is buying a new car. But then after a while, that happiness wears off. Anything in our lives is like that. We get a little happiness from it for a while, maybe, and then afterwards there's none. So it's really only in enlightenment that we have the complete, perfect, lasting happiness that we're actually looking for. I like to point to the image of the Buddha. If we look at the statue, he's got this smile on his face. Buddhas never frown. They have no reason to. Even when a Buddha is looking at us, even when they're looking at us and our ignorance, and seeing all the many ways in which we cause ourselves suffering, they still have no reason to frown because they see the Buddha nature within each of us. And they know that we're going to get there eventually. So let's begin. So right livelihood, number 5 here. And I've listed avoiding trading in weapons, avoiding slave trading and prostitution, and avoiding manufacturing or selling intoxicants. These are the 3 things that I saw listed when I studied this in the past. And basically what we're doing with livelihood is we're avoiding livelihood, work, that causes harm to others. This thing here about slave trading might actually seem outdated, but in fact there are parts of the world where this still happens. In Europe even, there are kids from sometimes that are taken and forced into becoming pickpockets, stealing, or even forced people, children and adults, forced into prostitution and things. This is a kind of slave trading. So this kind of thing actually still happens. Human trafficking, I think, is what they call it now. You see this on the news, human trafficking. And this is sometimes what they're talking about. Sometimes they're talking about moving illegal immigrants across borders and things. But this is often what they're talking about. So this is still very real. But this one here, avoiding trading in weapons, I struggle with this one a little bit because then you might think, well, what about people in the military? They use weapons, right? But then I believe I've mentioned the story of the Buddha in the past. Before he actually became the Buddha, he was on a ship with 500 merchants who were traveling and trading and making money. And he wasn't a perfectly enlightened Buddha, but he was a bodhisattva at the time, so he had some clairvoyance. He could read the minds of others, and so he knew that there was one bad guy on the ship whose plan was actually to kill all of the other merchants and steal their money. So a perfectly enlightened Buddha has perfect, skillful means. They would know perfectly what to say or do in order to prevent that harm from happening. But the Buddha didn't quite know what to do, or the Buddha to be didn't quite know what to do. And so the best he could come up with was to kill the robber to prevent him killing all these other people. So out of compassion, in this particular case, the Buddha took on the negative karma himself of killing in order, A, to save the lives of these other merchants, and also to protect that thief from committing the horrible negative karma of killing 500 people. So it's also said in this story that at the end of this bodhisattva's life, again, the Buddha to be's life, he died, and because of that negative karma that he willingly took on, he was born in hell, but only for a moment. And then he died in hell immediately and was reborn in a higher realm. So, yes, there is negative karma associated with any kind of aggression that we engage in. But sometimes a bodhisattva, out of compassion for others, will willingly take on that negative karma in order to prevent greater suffering. So I think we can say, of course, people in the military, not all of them are using weapons. Many of them are doing other kinds of work. And often we send out our military, particularly from the US, to go and do humanitarian work and things like that. But I think that we can look at it in this way, that these are people who are putting their own lives on the line and taking on, they might not see it this way, particularly if they're not Buddhist, but they're, taking on really this negative karma to prevent greater harm. But let's think for a minute about what could be right livelihood. So here we've talked about wrong livelihood. Right livelihood is described in negative terms. So we want to avoid trading in weapons, avoid slave trading and prostitution, and avoiding manufacturing or selling intoxicants. So what would be some examples of right livelihood then, actual right livelihood? Does anyone have a thought? So what would be an example of actual right livelihood, a positive job that someone could do?
Like a doctor?
Yeah, being a doctor, a teacher.
Or Peace Corps volunteer, I guess.
Peace Corps volunteer, yeah. So there are all kinds of livelihood. In fact, most of you are probably engaging in right livelihood and you don't even know it, because maybe you didn't think about it in those terms. I think if you're working in business, it can be right livelihood if you're being honest with your customers and you're really trying to be of benefit to people. Then, even working in business can be right livelihood. So these would be some examples. And also, I wanted to point out, too, that right livelihood is really a kind of right action. Normally, we could think of this, we could put this under number 4, right action, but because we spend so much time engaged in our work, the Buddha actually pulled this out. Because so much of our daily activity revolves around our work. Okay, so this is right livelihood. Then we have right effort. So this is making an effort to avoid the arising of harmful thoughts, words, and actions, and making an effort to instead cultivate skillful, compassionate thoughts, words, and actions. So right effort is putting our effort into the Dharma in order to have the skill to know what's harmful and what's skillful, what will lead us towards suffering and what will lead us away from suffering. We really need to study the Dharma. So this is part of right effort, studying the Dharma and then applying that knowledge. So that when we're going about our daily lives and then we're dealing with someone at work and they just are stupid and won't listen to us, instead of thinking that, we can stop and take a deep breath and try to figure out what the problem is. This is right effort. So I think this explanation, though, is pretty clear. Making an effort to avoid the arising of harmful thoughts, words, and actions, and then doing the opposite. Instead, trying to cultivate compassion in our thoughts, words, and actions. Compassion and wisdom. Okay, so then we have right memory. And I've got a number of different translations that I've seen for this over the years. Right memory, awareness, attention, or mindfulness. So this means remaining aware of the body, of the feelings, of the mind and mental qualities. And remembering in every moment what leads to suffering and what leads to nirvana. It's just maintaining that awareness. So much of our day we go about blindly, right? I did this today. I was down in Anaheim this morning, and on the way back, I realized at one point that I wasn't sure what highway I was on because I was thinking about something. This is how we go through much of our day, on automatic pilot. Luckily, I wasn't lost. I've done that before on the highways here in Los Angeles. I think I'm going north and I'm going south. Or I think that I turned on the 605 and next thing I know, I'm in the middle of nowhere on the 5. I don't know where I am. I've done this more than once.
And sometimes you're driving, but your mind...
That's exactly it. Or you're driving to work in the morning and it's a relatively short trip probably, and you've done it 1,000 times, and you know that you left your house and then suddenly you arrive at work and you think, how did I get here? Okay, that's not right mindfulness. So being aware in every moment. And the reason why it's important to know what we're doing with our body and what we're actually feeling, and knowing what's happening with our minds, is so that we can then apply the Dharma. If we're on automatic pilot and we're not really maintaining this awareness that we're on this Buddhist path, then that's when, someone says something or does something and we might snap at them and then create a bigger problem because we're not being mindful. We're not maintaining this awareness. And so in meditation, actually, we begin cultivating this awareness. Hopefully, the idea is that, we're doing meditation, and when we're done meditating, that doesn't mean we're done. Buddhist practice isn't done in 30 minutes a day or an hour a day. Buddhist practice is every moment of the day. That's Buddhist practice. So meditation, when we're doing meditation, first we calm the mind, right? And then we begin to notice, we're learning concentration right now by focusing on the breath at the tip of the nostril, right? Of course, there are different kinds of meditation that we can do. But we begin to notice, my body's feeling tense. Or, this has happened to me in meditation. I go, I think I'm feeling frustrated a little bit, like this subtle kind of annoyance or frustration. I'm in just kind of a mood, like I got up on the wrong side of the bed, and I don't know why. So I begin to notice what's happening with my mind, what my body feels like, and then I can start to apply the Dharma. If I don't have that awareness, I can't put the Dharma into practice. So this is why this is so important. So again, my point was that in meditation, we begin to see what's happening with the body, what's happening with the mind. We see what is skillful. If we're heading in a skillful direction, a wise and compassionate direction, or not. And then when we get up off the meditation cushion and we go about our lives, we begin applying that awareness to our daily lives. I think a lot of people, we talk about this sometimes in America, not just in Buddhism, but in religion in general. People like to put religion in a box. You go to church or the temple or whatever on Sunday, and then you put it aside and you just go do whatever during the week. But really for Buddhist practice, it's every moment. The whole point of Buddhist practice is to change how we're living our lives, how we see the world, and how we act in it. So then we come finally to right concentration, which I've also seen translated as right contemplation, right meditation. This word meditation is a little bit vague, though. Now, historically, if we look at some of the earliest sutras, which we find in the East Asian canon, the East Asian collection of sutras from the Chinese tradition, they're called the agamas, right? This is what we chant Monday through Thursday here in the evening. We're chanting sections of the agamas. There are similar sutras in the Pali canon. They're a little bit different though. I asked one of my professors at the university how much of these agama sutras and the Pali canon suttas, how much overlap is there? And he said he was guessing, but maybe 60 or 70%. So there's a lot of overlap between them. So in these early sutras, when the Buddha's talking about right concentration, it's defined specifically as engaging in the 4 jhanas. The word jhana is